This limited edition enamel dial Seiko from the Presage lineup normally retails at around 2,000 Australian dollars. But since I bought mine, I've been keeping an eye on the prices and I've started to see them regularly come back on the market, sort of still in new condition, but possibly sort of used once or twice for closer to 800 Australian dollars, more than half off the recommended retail price of these Seikos. And this might be one of the nicest made Seikos that I've ever experienced, and at around $800, it may be one of the best priced Seikos you can purchase. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches, and I'm talking about what I think might be the best bargain from Seiko that you can purchase. When you can find one of these watches for around 800 Australian dollars, for the quality, the design, the size, the details, I think that's the best Seiko that I've ever seen at that price. Not to say that that is cheap, it is not, but it's cheap for this watch. Because normally the full retail is 2,000 Australian dollars. And it's not just the full retail from Seiko. Because this is technically a limited edition, limited to 1,500 however, it seems to have held that value at authorized dealers. But you do not want to pay it. If you want to buy one of these, it's worth taking your time and finding one at the right price because there's quite a few of them available. When I purchased mine, I'm glad I didn't pay full retail because I ended up buying mine through my frequent flyer sort of account. They've got a marketplace inbuilt and I used some of my miles and a little bit of cash. And I ended up getting it at a price that I was really comfortable with. And I'm so glad that I didn't pay full price because now getting it from $800, well, that feels like an absolute bargain. And as you unpackage this watch and see the packaging that it comes in, you can see that this is not a standard Seiko. In fact, there is some extra effort put into this watch in multiple perspectives. Packaging, that handcrafted enamel dial, and it is harkening back to one of the first Seikos that was ever released. But I think they've chosen a really nice set of dimensions as well, because not all watch brands, when they do these vintage reissues or a little bit of sort of vintage inspired watches, pick the right dimensions. For me, this is actually perfect because the case itself is 40.3, just over that 40mm range. The height of the watch is 13.2. It has a lug to lug of 48, a 20mm lug width, and a weight on the supplied strap that it comes with also its deployant clasp of 92 grams. And when I put it onto my 17cm wrist, I think it suits me. I love this sort of dimensions. The 40 by 48 is always a sort of a sweet spot in my mind. Now those sizes, albeit theoretically are my favorites, don't always then translate into the perfect watch for me. But this one, it works. And it works even though that the white enamel dial takes up so much of the dial, which gives it a real wrist presence. But for some reason, it just seems to work. And it really is that dial that is the first thing that captures your attention. And it's likely one of the big motivating reasons why you would buy this one. Because it's not just a simple white dial. Not at all. It is a handcrafted enamel dial with multiple layers. Those layers transition from sort of one side down a little bit and steps down towards those subdials. In the one dial, it sort of creates a bit of an interesting swirling effect. And it is not until you get it out in the sunlight and you angle it that you'll see these sort of stepping stones towards the power reserve, stepping stones down towards that sub-date window, and it just really elevates this watch. The white enamel itself is beautiful, it stands out and it holds your attention, but those layers create details and depth to this watch. Hello there, sorry to interrupt the video. I understand that sometimes subscribing to channels can be a little bit annoying or you may not think to do it, but it actually makes such a huge difference to the person making the videos like me. So I'm just asking, if you haven't done so already, would you mind just hitting on that subscribe button? Thank you very much. Now let's get back to this video. Now everything is printed on top of this dial, the majority of it being black, but there is that little red 12 which provides a nice splash of color that I think this watch really appreciates. But on colour, I have to say there's one thing that has been a big disappointment for me. And this is the only disappointment for me from this watch, and it is the hands. because they look really good. I appreciate the shape of them, and I especially appreciate that little detail of a crescent moon on the counterbalance of that second hand. But all the three hands and those two small hands are painted blue. They are not heat treated blue. In fact, I reached out to Seiko specifically asking about this because I thought this is a $2,000 watch. It has to have heat treated blue hands, but it doesn't look like heat treated blue hands. And they confirmed to me, no, it is not heat treated. In fact, they said, no, we don't do that for Seiko. We keep that for King Seiko. We keep that for Grand Seiko. And that was disappointing. It was disappointing that an expensive watch doesn't have heat-treated blue hands. It's disappointing that a special edition that is harkening back to the first Seiko watch doesn't have blue hands. And it disappoints me slightly because now that I've seen that it's not heat-treated blue, albeit still quite nice blue, it just doesn't look quite right. But beyond that one complaint, this is actually a stunning watch that I really like. It has so many elements that make me sort of feel so drawn into this watch. And when Seiko said to me that they hold some of these elements back for their more expensive watches, well, it almost made me feel that I don't need those more expensive watches, because beyond those particular hands, this watch has all the elements that I want from a high-end Seiko. So I mentioned that there is that little power reserve and that small pointed date dial, which at a glance kind of looks like a small second. But this format is powered by an automatic Seiko 6R27 caliber. This is one of Seiko's slightly higher grade movements. It is a high beat 28,800 vibrations. It has a 45-hour power reserve, and it is made in Japan. A movement that you can see through the see-through caseback, and you can see on that it actually states that it is made in Japan. Now let's get back to that dial, because it really is a key feature of this. But what I want to show to you is that sapphire crystal that is used almost disappears. It really is only when you grab the light at a very certain angle that you realize that there is something covering that dial, which I'm so glad that they put the effort into putting a nice piece of crystal because of those details on that dial. And that enamel dial really captures the light anyway. I wouldn't want the enamel to capture the light and then the crystal to capture the light. No, they've made a great choice by putting a lovely crystal on this one. Now, often I've found with Presage watches or other dress watches is that the case is often overlooked. It's overlooked in a way that they've tried to make them simple, which I get for that sort of style, but I tend to like some details, some extra elements to the case, something that grabs my attention, and they've done exactly that with this watch. What Seiko has done is they've created a case that retains a relative simplicity sort of look, but they've also added those details that I find more and more important to me as I've chosen a watch. And really, when I look at the case, I see three things that stand out. Firstly, when you look at that solid bezel, there is a clear separation between the bezel and the case, creating an element of interest and a sort of separation between the top and the sides of that watch. And at that point where they do meet, there is a small line of brushing as well, which helps further break that up. And that brushing is then continued onto the tops of those lugs, breaking up the polish and the brushing. And as you look down the lengthways of this case, you'll see that it bulges out slightly. And I've seen this on a couple of Seikos before, and it's an element that I like. It creates a softness to the case and just something different. It takes away any slab-sidedness of it at all. Not that in this sort of size it would anyway, but it's just an element that I particularly like. I like that it is broken up, that there's a little bit of fine bit of brushing, and there's some shape to that case. Now this watch has 100 meters of water resistance, even though this is not a screwed down crown, which surprises me a little bit. Not so much that it has 100 meters of water resistance and no screw down crown, but the fact that it has 100 meters of water resistance, and this is one of the Presage watches. This is more of a dressy watch from the dressy lineup of Seiko, but it has 100 meters of water resistance. If Seiko can do 100 meters of water resistance on this one, I don't understand why they do lesser amount of water resistance on other watches. But I also like how they've tried to stop this watch hovering above wrist a little bit, because some watches certainly can. This one, they've curved the lugs down, which helps it nestle down in and on to my wrist. Now this black leather strap, there have been two sticking points for me. Firstly, it's black, and I'm not really drawn to black straps for some reason. I find them a little bit too dressy or something. I tend to swap them out. I also have found that these watches with them reversed, with the tail on the inside of the wrist, is a little bit weird. But for this watch, because it is so nice and the strap is so nice, I've decided to keep it as is to see whether or not I would connect to it. And I don't think I've completely connected to the color, but I have now connected to this strap direction. I actually quite like it on the inside now, especially this one because the strap itself is very nice and that deployant clasp is also particularly good. And that brings me back to the price of this watch, because there might be a question in the back of your mind, because $2,000 is a lot. $800 is still a lot. And $800 is a lot when you consider Presage watches from Seiko, because you can get a cocktail time from Seiko for half that. And I've owned a couple of those cocktail time watches and they're beautiful. I love them. But what I can say, this one's a lot better. I'm not sure if it's twice as good if you can find one for twice the price, but I like it a lot more. In fact, this one is going to be staying in my collection longer term. It has stayed in my collection for quite some time. I've enjoyed wearing it, whereas the cocktail times ended up leaving fairly quickly. But if I can give you one piece of advice about this watch, that is, do not pay full retail. Do not even come close to it. Try to find one for that 800 Australian dollars. And whilst you try to find one, or whilst you try and think about whether you want one of these, maybe you can watch a couple of my other videos next.